안녕하세요. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone, wherever you may be. Welcome to today's book talk, and I'm Kyungmin Bae from UP Korea Research Center, and I will be your moderator for today's event. We are very much delighted to welcome all our participants joining us in the safety of their homes through Facebook and YouTube live streaming. And we wish to greet everyone and hope all will have a fruitful learning and experience this afternoon. So before we officially start today's event, I will just read a brief house rules for everyone. So before we begin the program, we would like to remind everyone that you may send your questions and comments to our panelists throughout the event in the Facebook or YouTube comment section. And kindly introduce yourself with your affiliation when you raise questions, if possible. And then the questions will then be collected and answered during the open forum after all the panels will talk about the book. And then we are also reminded that the whole forum is a safe space and will not tolerate any form of bullying or trolling, and academic or otherwise. The organizer reserves the right to remove those who will create any disruption in any part of the program. And we also would like to inform that this event will be recorded. So today's event is very meaningful, especially particularly meaningful for UPKLC as well, because this is in collaboration of various institutions. So UPKLC is honored to co-host today's event with fully booked. Everyone of the team is behind the studio and they are manning and providing all the technical support. Thank you so much. Korean Cultural Center in the Philippines and UP Department of Linguistics and Ateneo Korean Studies Program. So thank you everyone to join us and make the event more meaningful today. So let us begin. Today, as you see their faces on the screen right now, we have three panels who will share their interesting insights on the book Pachinko. Let me introduce each one to all of you, all of our audience first. So first is Dr. Shin-dong Kim. He's currently in Korea, right, Professor? Yeah. So let me read his short bio note first. Dr. Shin-dong Kim is a professor at the media school, Hallym University, Korea. He founded the Institute for Communication Arts and Technology, ICAT, and served as the vice president for international affairs for the Hallym University. He has been an active advocate and innovator for the globalization of higher education throughout his professional career. His area of research and teaching covers culture and creative industries, media policy and political economy, global communications, and film or social history. He recently managed a 5-year national research project on modeling the Korea's ICT development. So let us meet Dr. Kim later on. And next is Dr. Jean Encinas-Franco. Dr. Jin is an associate professor at the Department of Political Science in UP Diliman. She was a faculty associate of the Women and Gender Institute in Miriam College previously, where she also taught at an international studies department. Her research interest is on gender and politics, particularly on discourses of gender and migration. Thank you, Dr. Jin. And last but not the least, we have Nicole Tablizo. Nicole is pursuing a master's degree in comparative literature, focusing on Asian literature at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She's writing a thesis on publishing translations of Indonesian literature. And Nicole is currently working at the news agency for the global development and humanitarian community. So we have three very valuable resource person today. So are we all ready? Yes. So smile means yes. So we have a few warming up questions because reading is very personal activity, right? So we will just talk about how you really chose the book and what really made you delve into the book. So just to share some background about the book itself, as everyone knows, this novel by Min Jin Lee was published in 2017, and then it was already very sensational and attracting many readers in the globe, including in Korea. And I think Korean translated version was published early in 2018. And then I think recently, since Apple TV also produced the adaptation of this book into a drama series, I think more readers chose the book to read the original story rather than or aside from the screenplay. So maybe we can start with Dr. Kim first. How did you really know about this book?
Hi, Shin-dong Kim from Korea. I was introduced with this book from my former student, who was actually a student at the Temple University in the
Mm,
U.S. She's not Korean, she's not American, but she is from Czech Republic.
mm,
I met her at a summer workshop in Greece, and she was one of the students attending the summer workshop. We had a chance to briefly talk about my teaching interest, which is
mm,
colonialism reflected and reconstructed in the public media, including film and TV dramas. And somehow she remembered my research interest, and then when she returned to Temple University, she sent me information about the book and how she was fascinated with that book. So I immediately ordered that book from Amazon, and you know, needless to say, I was fully, fascinated with with the book, especially on the way how the book was describing the colonial experience.
Okay.
Oh, so Dr. Kim read the English original.
Yes, yes, I have this sort of one. I also checked with the Korean translation at the
Mm,
bookshop briefly, but frankly speaking, I didn't like it.
Mhm.
Perhaps because the book was originally written
Right, yeah.
in English, So
English.
when you read the book in English, you feel the
Mm.
flow is a lot more natural, and the richness of English is well reflected in the book. But when I checked with the translation, you always get the sense of translated books.
Yeah, right.
You
Yeah.
immediately sense this is a translation, not something originally created. And but that doesn't mean that translated books are always bad. But this
Mhm.
particular translation, I felt a bit uncomfortable, so I didn't even buy the copies for myself.
Okay, so how about Dr. Jin? How did you find this book at first?
Okay, thank you for that question because I've always been fascinated with Korean pop culture, but I my journey brought me to Korean literature and also Korean politics. So when I first heard about Min Jin Lee, I actually first um, finished her book, The Free Food for
Mm.
Millionaires. And then after reading it, I then bought also on Amazon, no, the what do you call this Pachinko, and I it was truly fascinating, and it is well within my purview of interest, which is on feminist international relations. I am particularly interested in the book's depiction of
Mhm.
the Spanish colonial regime, identities, and patriarchy. Uh, that's one of the themes articulated in the book.
Wow. How about Nicole?
Hi. So I first stumbled upon the term zainichi
Mm-hmm.
in my in my Japanese society and culture class in UP Diliman's Asian Center, where I took the elective course, and it was only the term zainichi was only mentioned in passing when we were discussing Japanese population. But I got curious with the zainichi because I didn't know much about the historical relations between Japan and Korea. And being a literature major, the most accessible thing for me would be to read novels or other literary texts about the Zainichi experience. And I was lucky enough that around that time, Minjin Lee's Pachinko just hit the shelves.
Mm. Okay, so we can see there was some recommendations, and then I think there was also personal curiosity, especially our two Filipino panels, because of the class and because of the research interest. So to continue, can you also share if there was any favorite character or characters in the book, and why you particularly resonate with some of those characters? Maybe we can start with Nicole this time.
My favorite would be, I think, Noah. Noah Beck would be my favorite. I feel for the character because he's naive. He he just wants to sticks to his values and morals despite the environment not being particularly warm or receptive to Koreans in Japan. So he just wants to be a good person. We always hear that line from him. He's just trying to be good. He's just trying to be excellent so that the Japanese would be accepting of him and would not look down on him. So he kind of lives with this Kantian ethics of
Hmm.
um, I'm going to be good because I want to see good in society. He has that kind of ideas. But in the end, we know what happens to him. I also feel for him because the danger with the types of Noah is that they cannot accept alternatives to what they religiously believe in. So in his case, he he has this straight as an arrow thinking that just by being good, he'd be accepted, and he can't see other alternatives to it. Unlike his brother Musasu, Musasu says that he's not trying to be good. He has that. He says, "I'm not trying to be good like Noah." And in the end, when he is asked, "What do you think happened to Noah?" He just says, "I think he stopped trying to become a good Korean." So there's this contrast between the two brothers, but I think it's really Noah. Noah is my favorite, and in a way, he embodies this idea of Nihon Jinron, the single race, or the homogeneous as the idea of identity in Japanese society. And the problem is that he wants to be Japanese, but we all know that he cannot be Japanese because he's Korean, and he just cannot accept that.
Okay. Let's hear from two other panelists first. How about Dr. Jin? Would you share anything?
Yeah, for me, it's of course Hunja. No? For me, she exemplifies, especially, what she said, that a woman's lot is to suffer. No? And from what I've read about Korean history, women played very big roles, no, in Korean nation building, and Sunja exemplifies that, no. But then it's not just suffering; it's also overcoming patriarchy, trying to defy tradition. That makes her character really very, very admirable. But you really see, I mean, from what I've learned over the past probably what 10 years already about what Korea is all about. Her journey to overcoming tradition and patriarchy is really very Korean, you know, from what I know about Korea so far. Yeah.
Mm. Um, okay. How
Well,
about
my
yes?
my my choice is actually Noah.
Mhm.
Interestingly, well, maybe because of a little bit different reasons. Well, the novel actually provide us with, you know, a lot of interesting characters. Not only Noah, but Noah is to me a kind of the prime example of identity troubles. If we are thinking of the colonial space, which is complicating almost everything, but especially for the people who are colonized, in terms that how they are identifying their uh, their status, their nature of social existence, or the relationship with other people in the same society, kind of things. So identity trouble is one of the most difficult and traumatic problem in colonialism. And that's why colonialism is something to be perished, because it is causing its identity trouble almost as a kind of violence. So Noah is exactly the one who is going directly through that identity conflict, perhaps because of his learning, different from his brother, Mojasu, who is rather sort of giving up a kind of direct struggle against the violent colonial system, but instead tried to get by developing his own instinctive skill as a Pachinko manager. But different from Mojasu, this learned man who endeavored a modern life in the colonial space, but yet knowing that whatever effort he favored, still he's not able to get out of that captured identity as colonized Korean. he was a successful and recognized achiever in Japanese imperial system by becoming a student in elite institution, Waseda. But still, he could not escape from the fact that he is always captured as Korean to anybody he is related to. So, and he was already a unbearable uh, violence, I guess. And then he tried to get out of that systematic and structural violence, only to find out it's impossible, which eventually led him to commit suicide. You know? So I, and one other reason why I thought Noah is critically interesting character made by Minji Lee is that out of so many different narratives on colonial past, it's very rare to meet with this kind of character from any, like, from, for example, if you're thinking of the Korean films about Japanese colonial period, these commercialized popular films, popular narratives are usually providing you a very typified,
Yeah.
simplified character, usually like a traitor or patriot, you know. But in reality, majority of colonized people were in between, neither patriot nor, traitor. You know, that's usually the kind of identity they had to deal with, in reality. But in popular narratives, these realistic characters are all gone and fantasized or demonized. But in this case, Noah was a much more realistic and very rare character, successfully sort of set by the author.
Yeah. Any other things to add, Nicole or Dr. Jin?
Yeah, I'm actually fascinated by your discussion, Dr. Kim, because I look at it in the way how, I mean, Filipinos have also um, sort of built its colonial mentality, no, over the years that we were colonized by the United States. People say that we are more Americans than the Americans. And in a sense, although they were just there for more than 50 years, our society still bears uh, a lot of things that we owe to the US colonial regime, particularly our brand of politics, for instance.
Yeah, so I think what Nicole said earlier, and then what Dr. Kim um, um, explicitly explained to us really makes sense, because identity cannot really be defined in one phrase or in a fixed uh, portion in the society. And then their lives, especially the contrasting brothers' lives, really show how their life was really in limbo, how much no matter how much they really struggle, or no matter how much they really try to assimilate in whatever ways, it was not really projected positively, or projected romantically in their real life. Yeah. Just to add, what I also felt with some other characters, I also fully agree with what each of you have mentioned, and I also personally felt about Sonja's sister-in-law Kyung-hee, because
Mhm.
I don't know, because during the time I was reading the book, I also went through some personal struggles, not really compared to their struggles in the book, but I was having some emotional turbulence in life.
Mhm.
So I think that was the reason why I was immersed in her personality and how the fragile woman who was in Japan, and she had no child to raise, so she was really doing all the things for Sonja and her kids. So that also showed me some kind of Korean women, or the role of the women, and then some sufferings, whichever, like physical or emotional. So I think we can talk about some other characters as well as we go deeper about the narratives of the novel. So, in terms of the characters, you shared very interesting insights. Do you also have any quotes or any pages you always remember, or you can flip the page and you can share with us today? Dr. Kim, do you have
I
any?
forgot. I read this book already like 3-4 years ago,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and I, in the preparation of today's talk, I tried
Mhm.
to pull out the book again, and then just opened randomly these that pages, and especially looked again the part on Noah,
Mhm.
and I felt that I have already forgotten quite many
Oh.
parts of this rich narrative. But I also watched the Apple TV's dramatized
Mhm.
serial
Mhm.
a couple of days ago, and I was feeling very sorry that if the original novel is like 100, then the Apple TV is only taking maybe 10% out of it. So the
Mhm.
richness of the Pachinko as an original novel was never really fully
Mhm.
appreciated in the dramatized version. And for example, the Noah story is completely missing. Not only the Noah story, but many other parts are either missing or completely recreated. I
Mhm.
mean, some parts are not even mentioned in the book. So that doesn't mean that TV series has no value. It has its own kind of recreation. So they may be linked each other, but not necessarily the same narrative. Especially on the way, how these two narratives are reconstructing the colonial
Mhm.
memories. I used this book even in my Asian cinema course,
Mhm.
in which I picked films from Asian countries on their colonial experiences.
Mhm.
Interestingly, it's very difficult to find any Japanese film on the
Mhm.
colonial period. Likewise, it's very difficult to find any German film on the Second World War or the Jewish problem. So
Mhm.
it's in a way it's understandable, when Japanese filmmakers try to embark on that kind of project. It would be very difficult to
Yeah.
deal with the Japanese, popular viewers. So
Yeah.
instead, they just, hand off, not even
Mhm.
touching that issue and leaving it in a complete sort of oblivion. You know,
Mhm.
that's kind of is unspoken uh, consensus
Mhm.
on this forgetfulness, uh, and the entire history is just disappearing from the particular society. On the other hand, on the Korean side or Chinese side, that particular brutal history of colonial period is sort of much exaggerated sometimes,
Mhm.
or amplified, or closely focused, and repeated. So it's like the narrative attention on that particular period becomes easily like distorted. with intention, with very strong intention. So one other critical reason why I highly acclaim Min Jin-mi's approach in reconstructing the colonial experience is that the novel is giving us a very close account and very close to the reality as much as possible out of her thick research, meeting with the real people who went through all these hardships. And she jotted down every detail, which we can immediately feel from the reading of the novel. So there's no like dramatic exaggeration in her novel. But if you see the Apple TV version, it's closer to the typical Korean popular film on the colonial period, something like the assassination, or in the shadow of something. In these popularized, commercialized narrative, the colonial history is turning into fantasy. In which a group of Korean people are bravely fighting against the Japanese army, and then this handful of Korean people, even including farmers and women, are crushing the whole battalion of Japanese professional army. So it invite these kind of popular narratives are easily inviting us to a world of fantasy, and reality or realistic history is not fantastic at all. So in that sense, I could see again the true value of the original copy.
Yeah. I think this is very important point. Even if we didn't really watch the dramatized adaptation in Apple TV, usually when books are really adapted into musical or dramas or movies, that are really missing because maybe it's inevitable to attract the general viewers and then the audience in the globe. So while listening to Dr. Kim, I was wondering how the Western viewers will really react to this dramatized adaptation, because after all, this is really westernized. I mean, the media is the Western centered, and it's Apple TV. So I think we can see how really people from different continents will react differently. How about Nicole? Do you have any quotes or any pages you always recall or remember?
My favorite will be the opening line of the
Okay.
novel. It's easy to find because it's the
Yeah.
first line. It says something like, "History has failed us, but no matter." So it already gives you the sense that the characters in the novel are not the victors in history. These are ordinary Koreans who bear the brunt of historical changes. So in the historical context of the novel, they're the ones bearing the brunt of the colonial system. During the colonial times, 85% of Koreans work in agriculture, or they are farmers. And then the Japanese introduced laws wherein the Japanese can acquire Korean lands, which displace farmers. And these farmers are the ones who had to migrate to Japan in order to work in burgeoning factories, mainly in Osaka and in Tokyo, but mostly Osaka, because these are small to medium sized enterprises in Osaka, which requires little Japanese language proficiency. So anyway, I'm segueing to another thing, but so I like that line because it presents us with the stoic resolve the characters in the novel have. We follow characters of poor economic background who lives to survive each day, which then carves their character to choose practicality over sentiment. So these are the characters that are that are not named in official histories but only appear as statistics. So, but
Mm.
as I've said, they are the ones who suffer the most. So, um, I guess building up with what Dr. Kim said, the novel as a space, it provides alternative history to official accounts. Sometimes the problem with popular films is that they tend to follow what the popular historical accounts is, because since it's mass media, um, it has the tendency to always uh, make it make the output or make the product palatable to most. Whereas novels, I'm not saying novels are inaccessible,
Mhm.
but compared to films, they're more inaccessible. They can be more intimidating um, to process compared to films. But they offer us alternative histories. They all
Mhm.
offer us different narratives that are most of the time not included in history. And when I was reading about Min Jin Lee's process in writing the book, she
Mhm.
mentioned that she actually started writing this 20 years ago. And then, sorry, I think she started writing this in the 1990s. She was living in Tokyo at that time,
Mhm.
and
Mm.
since she has a degree in history, her tendency was to really document. She interviewed Zainichi matriarchs, then wrote accounts. That's why we have. That's what, as Dr. Kim has observed, this seems to be a very realistic account of what the Zainichi or what Koreans during Japanese occupation experienced. So, just to add on the current discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How about Dr. Jin?
Just to add to what Dr. Kim and Nicole said, I think about Minjini, I think her first degree, if I'm not mistaken, is history.
Mm-hmm.
History. And do you know that she is writing a novel about Hagwon? The
Yeah.
Hagwon in Korea, especially the young Americans who go to Korea to be
Mm.
in Hagwon centers. And uh, for that novel, she has been interviewing people just to be able to write that novel. With regard to films being, I mean, having gotten their inspiration from literature or from novels, I think that's really the case. No, the substance is diluted primarily because they are for the ratings. No, they want ratings, and they also do not wish to have ambiguities in their presentation because they fear that it might be misconstrued and it
Mm-hmm.
might create a controversy which would then make the rating suffer. That's my I think if I remember correctly, someone said a long time ago that the uh, best that the novel that has been best translated into a movie is The Godfather Part 1. They say it's very accurate. Yeah. And also, before I say my favorite quote, I was struck by what Dr. Kim said about films because on their colonial occupation, because I try to think about, I would like to believe that I've been an avid consumer of Filipino films, but I cannot think of a Filipino film about Spanish, American, or Japanese colonial regime.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of movies in the 60s and 70s about the war, World War II, but it's really B movies. No, it's just an action movie. No, so yeah, okay. Um, my favorite quote is actually yeah. I also read the movie. I read the novel last year, early last year, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
mistaken. I had to look for my favorite quote. It's when Hansu and Sunja were talking,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and the quote says that people are rotten everywhere you go. They're no good. You want to see a very bad man? Make an ordinary man successful beyond his imagination. Let's see how good he is. when he can do whatever he wants. I like it because it's such a classic and universal, uh, quote, and it resonates with politics and power, and how people's character can in fact change when uh, you give them power. So I like it very much because it just doesn't talk about what happened in the novel itself, but it can be
Mhm.
applied in any setting.
Well, I also may I add, because you're asking any memorable pages or quotes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Actually, this is the quote by the author herself from the
Mhm.
famous anthropologist Benedict Anderson, from
Mm,
his renowned book, The Imagined Community.
unity.
And this part is placed right at the beginning of the Noah part.
Mm.
Mm,
So it's a very condensed part from the Benedict Anderson's main argument on the nature of the political community, which we imagine as a nation, you know.
mm,
So even if a nation, the smallest nation in the world, no one can actually know everybody in the same community. But and yet, in the largest like imagined community like China, people, so many people still hold on to each other, and then believe that somehow they belong to one, like you know one community. So this interesting sort of characteristic of what we believe as nation is actually troubling in the case of Noah. So I think Min Jin Lee intentionally placed that the conflicting idea on the nation from Benedict Anderson, placed on the chapter of the Noah, and then seeing how Noah is actually being troubled with this nation, notion of the nation. If you are being asked, let's suppose that all of us are living under a Japanese colonial community, whether it's in the Philippines at the end of the Second World War, or Hong Kong, or China, as a part of this Japanese-made the Greater East Asian co-prosperity realm. How would we be able to identify ourselves? If you are being asked whether you are Japanese, would you say you're Japanese? I mean, colonized Korea for almost like 36 years. If I was born and grew up in Korea during that colonized time, and someone is asking me, "Are you Japanese?" What would be the relevant answer to that question? Absolutely majority and large number of Korean people at the time identified themselves as Japanese, as a matter of fact, legally. I mean, not ethnically. It's just like when I was staying in Hong Kong last year. If I had asked the question to my Hong Kong students, "Are you Chinese?" Many students denied, "No, I'm not Chinese." So if you twist the question, "Are you not Chinese?"
Mm.
then they say, "Yes, we are Chinese." So being a Chinese, yet at the same time not being a Chinese, is conflicting the identity of Hong Kong students today. Likewise, this identity conflict is really intensified, not only through Noah alone, but through many characters in the novel. But Noah is by far the prime example of that conflict.
Mm. Yeah.
Just like to add on that,
Nicole, yes.
so the quote from Benedict Anderson would be the horizontal comradeship, which
Mm,
which assumes that everyone in the nation has the same rights. This idea of we're all the same under the
mm,
same nation. But then Min Jin Lee also presents us with Japanese characters who are deviants, who are considered outcasts too in Japanese
mm,
society.
mm,
So,
mm,
for example, you have Etsuko, who
Mhm.
She's a divorced woman, and she was banished by her family just by being a divorced woman. Even though she's Japanese, she's ethnic Japanese. And then another example would be Haruki, which is when they were young, he's Musasu's best friend. When they were young, his peers bully him because they think he is burakumin, which is an outcast caste in Japanese society.
Right.
And then he grew up, and we find out that he's homosexual, which is another deviancy in Japanese society. You can't be, you should be straight in Japanese society. So it's this illusion of nationhood, I guess. This illusion that we're all the same, we're all equal. But then it betrays the fact that even those who are ethnic Japanese could still be outcasted in their society. And then to also just add to what we've discussed before, since Dr. Jean and Dr. Kim mentioned movies, films, and historical films, I guess history is always easy to history is so malleable when we fashion it into art, and it's all since it happened in the past, it can be easily it's so easy to form narratives about it with little verification, or well, we can verify historical facts, of course, but it's so easy to mold it into something else. And especially in the idea of nationhood, when you can easily form an imagined community by putting an us versus them narrative. So I guess in the case of Japanese colonialism and imperialism, it's so easy for former colonized countries or subjects to put up a us versus the Japanese. And that builds up into this nation building narrative.
Yeah, I think everyone's what everyone said really interweaves, and then it shows the same message at the same time. And just for some readers who are still reading, or who are wishing to choose the book, I will also share the one of the pages I found interesting. It was by Mosasu and Haruki. Like Nicole just mentioned Haruki as well. And then the quote says, "Listen, man, there's nothing you can do. This country isn't going to change. Koreans like me cannot leave. Where are we gonna go? But the Koreans back home aren't changing either. In Seoul, people like me get called Japanese bastards. And in Japan, I'm just another dirty Korean, no matter how much money I make or how nice I am." So the reason, when I was reading the books, sometimes I really stumbled upon very heart aching this depict, and then the memories that Min Jin Lee was narrating, because this is still really happening. And if we talk to those Korean descendants or Zainichi people in Japan, this still happens. So it's not really forgotten history, but it's just undocumented, and it was just unrecorded because it was the common people's ordinary life. I think if you haven't chosen the book, I think it's really worthwhile reading it after this book talk. So just to add a bit light question, did you also find any Korean or Japanese words appearing in the novel interesting, uh, or some cultural artifacts? For instance, when Sunja and Kyunghee are trying to make some living, they always produce some homemade kimchi. And then the process of making kimchi or pickled cabbage was very meticulously described in some pages. So maybe I will ask Nicole and Dr. Jin first, because you read this as a non-Korean reader. Were there any Korean or Japanese words you found interesting or particularly attractive? Nicole?
Well, there's the different Japanese terms for names. So
Okay.
the honmyo, the tsume,
Mhm.
At first, I got confused with that because, for example, I think it's Noah. All characters in the novel would have Japanese names that they will use in official transactions. So in school,
Mm.
no one needs to go by Nobuo Bando,
Mm.
his Japanese name, and then even Sunja has her own Japanese name, which she sometimes forgets in the novel. But that fascinated me. But then it also showed the suppression in a colonial system where you are really molded to fit into this idea of what you should be or what your identity should be, and then you need to. It seems that they can only use their Korean names within the confines of the home or within the confines of the Korean ghetto in Ikaino, but outside of it, they must pass as Japanese. So the Sume, the assumed Japanese name or Sume, helps them pass as Japanese. And then so there's that, and then another cultural thing would be the Jesa.
Mm.
Um, Kyung Hee and Sunja, they mentioned towards the end of the book when they reminisce about the homeland. They say that they wish to perform the Jesa to
Mm.
honor ancestors. But since they are now in Japan and they, I think they cannot perform it in Japan, and at the same time they are now Christians. So their new religion forces them to not perform those. They cannot perform cultural. I think this cultural ritual, I guess.
Okay, how about Dr. Jin?
I remember the candy that they sell in the market. I forget the name of the candy. Uh, the the way in which the candy was described was so um, detailed, such that you can almost taste it.
Yeah.
In the novel. I forget the name, no. But of course, there are Korean terms that are I'm already familiar with.
Mm.
Exposed to Korean dramas and movies, Ajumuni, the Oppa. But I am surprised. And there's also the young ban, the Japanese word for the upper class. That's new to me. But what
Mm.
is familiar to me, but seems to have been recontextualized in the course of this novel, is the Yakuza. Because the Filipinos have come to know about Yakuza in the 80s when there were
Mm.
lots of Filipino entertainers who went to Japan and have been either abused, and people usually say that it was because of the yakuza employer. So it's the first time that I'm seeing another way in which yakuzas are involved in a story.
Okay, how about Dr. Kim?
Well, in my case, actually, what attracted my attention was not the Korean or Japanese words, but the
Mm.
names of the main characters, the Christian names like Solomon, Joseph, Isaac, Noah, all these, you know, like, Christian names, which is not necessarily, even if the Joseph and Isaac, uh, especially in the case of Isaac, he was serving as a pastor, but not necessarily all these Christian names are not necessarily reflecting their religiosity, Uh, but then, in a way, the name, like this Western name, created an image of more like westernized and modernized
Mm.
images onto these people, and sometimes it's neither Japanese or nor Korean, even if they are continually being called as Korean, you know, but then their names are not really Korean. Doesn't sound like Korean. They eventually go to, like, especially through Solomon, the families migrating from Korea via Japan to America, as if the name has already, carried some kind of prophecy. So that was something alluding to me. It's just even if the author probably never intended that kind of thing, or the Western kind of images onto these characters, but somehow it attracted my attention.
Okay, so like our panels mentioned, there are some words I think Minjin Lee intentionally used the original Korean or Japanese. So those words will also provoke I think the reader's thinking. Whether why it was not translated, or whether the original meaning is attached to any emotions or the events the characters are going through. So maybe next question can talk about what the characters really experience in the story. So the question goes, because the story really evolves dealing with home, because everyone has a different concept or different background of something to call their home. So in your understanding or in your sentiment, what does home really mean to each of the characters in the story, and do you think it ever change it? And if so, in what ways did yearning for home really color the tone of the novel? Maybe Dr. Kim, if you are ready, you could share anything first.
Well, I don't know. I don't think I particularly remember the weight or the significance of home to the main characters. Home, different from hometown. Home was where the family gathered, I guess. These people, the lives of these people were on the road, So, but that doesn't mean they didn't have a home.
Mhm.
Their home moved along, with their trajectory. So home, when we tend to think home as a fixation, a location, a place where you turn yourself to, when especially you are in difficult times, for resting, for love, for support, for nourishment. But their home was always on the move, perhaps squarely reflecting the fate of these like colonized, uh, uh, people, fighting in a way, fighting to finally build a proper home. But that
Yeah, yeah,
doesn't mean that they didn't have a home. They
right.
always had a home, but
Mhm.
in a way, they kept fighting to establish something they properly name and believe and take as a home.
Yeah, yeah. How about Nicole? Do you share anything?
Well, part two of the novel is titled Motherland. So I think the idea here is, but what's interesting is that it's titled Motherland, but its setting is in Osaka, Ikaino, Osaka, the Korean ghetto. So I guess it represents this, I guess, shift between the first generation Zainichis, the parents Sunja, Yosef, Kyung-hee, Isak, and Hansu, versus the second generation, the sons, Mosasu and Noah. So for Mosasu and Noah, the motherland would be Ikaino. Ikaino is their home. It's where they grew up. And Korea is just something told to them by the adults, by their parents. Whereas for the first generation, motherland would be, in the novel, they use the term Chosun, not, they interchange Chosun and Korea in the novel. And I'm not sure, maybe Miss Dr. Bay and Dr. Kim can correct if is Chosun the Japanese name?
So when they left their country, it was Joseon.
Oh, it was
But after the war, Joseon disappeared, and then, as a matter of fact, Korea was constructed as a new nation. So they are the same country, but yet they are not the same country.
So I guess with the first generation, it's them. Yosef and Hansu are the ones using Chosun when they say they want to go back. They don't say they want to go back to Korea. It's Chosun. So I guess it's that the first generation's idea of motherland is still the mainland, still the peninsula. But for the second generation, it's no longer that, and it only exists in memories for them. Hand me down memories. And then in the character of Noah, he actually imbibes this idea of Korea as a place where he could just be free. There's a part in the novel wherein Hansu is telling him to study well because he might be needed to rebuild the homeland. They maybe after World War II, after the war, they can go back to Korea and he can rebuild the motherland. Noah has imbibed that idea that he needs to study. I think that's part of the reason he's a scholar. And then he imagines that maybe in Korea he would be, the author used the term normal. In Korea, maybe I would be normal. And I guess for him, it's probably paradise because there he won't be othered in Korea. He's just Korean. But then when later on in the novel, he has been to Korea, but he didn't feel anything for it. He actually said to Sunja, my supposed motherland. I've been to Korea, my supposed motherland. And that's it. He doesn't say anything much about it. And the same goes with Mosasu. He's been to Korea multiple times, but he doesn't also feel anything for the supposed motherland. He even says, Dr. Bay has quoted the line, he feels an outsider in Korea. He also feels an outsider in Japan. So I guess it's actually a question of home here. I guess it's tied to the question of identity again. How would they fashion an identity in a space that is not very receptive to them or is keen on placing them as an other? In Japanese society, is very homogeneous when it comes to its identity. It's a single race nationhood. So with that idea of nationhood, you always pose other people as an other who are not ethnically Japanese. So unfortunately, it's the Zainichi and other indigenous minorities that gets placed as the other.
You know why Chainichi is Chainichi? Chainichi,
Outsider.
Chainichi is the people who intentionally stayed with the disappeared nation of Joseon. Because they came from Joseon, but after the war, Joseon was divided and then disappeared. And now we have only North Korea and South Korea. The Chinese people denounced the idea of choosing either of this North or South Korea, and they want to choose unified Joseon, but which is not existing anymore. So, and Japanese government, in a way, and strangely, classified these people who belong to Joseon, which is not existing, but imaginary country, Joseon, which cannot issue them a passport or visa, So that's why Chinese people are still having problems in traveling abroad. So when they really want to travel abroad, they have to have a special permit, from the Japanese government, or if they want to make travel freer, then they have to choose the South Korean passport. But they don't really want it because, just as you mentioned, these people do not link themselves to South Korea. They feel nothing to this nation, and they don't feel this is my proper home.
Yeah. How about Dr. Jin? Would you like to add anything? Do you hear us, Dr. Jin?
Maybe
I
seems to
think
be.
that
Oh,
the
yes.
idea, I think the idea of home has always been there in um, Min Chin Lee's novel. For instance, in Free Food for Millionaires, identity and home was also a topic, and I
Mm-hmm.
guess it's part of also of her identity as a Korean American. So that's why in this Pachinko, um, she really emphasized this trope. No, uh, for me, the novel is really about the home where, as Nicole said, everyone is free to um, exercise his or her identity.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if they were in Korea, for as long as it was occupied by the Japanese, then they were not free to exercise their identity. However, when they finally uh, returned to Korea, you know, they realized that they were also, in the process of their struggles to make their country free, or to wait for the time when their country will uh, be free. They've also been changed, no, by the process. So, like what Dr. Kim said, it's not really, the beauty of the novel is that it doesn't give us fantastic presentations, because if it were a probably a film, then it would probably, when they returned to Korea, the scene would probably be they were kissing the the soil as soon as they land on the airport or something like that.
Okay, so very interesting, and maybe we can just add one relevant question to this discussion, because we spoke about Zainichi, and then Dr. Kim also explained to our viewers what really Zainichi means, the word itself. So, in the story, many of the main characters struggle with shame throughout their lives, and maybe we can say due to ethnicity or family life or the choices they made or other factors. So, how did you feel that shame drive both their successes or failures in some of their lives? Shall we start with Nicole?
There are lots of shame in the novel. The novel actually starts with Sunja's journey. It sets off the novel, and it starts because she was shamed for
Mm-hmm.
being a single mother. Having a baby with somebody twice her age, Kohansu, and it starts with that. That's the reason why she chose to marry Isaac and go to Osaka. And so it starts with shame, and then lots of characters get shamed for their ethnicity and the poverty they experience. Most most usually the poverty they experience. The young Noah says that he is ashamed of going to school, not only because he's Korean, but also because he smells of garlic.
Yeah.
Because his mom sells kimchi, and garlic is one of the ingredients, and he reeks of garlic, and his schoolmates bully him for that. And they also know that he lives in a ghetto, that he's poor. So we have this. It seems to me that shame in the novel is particularly used in the marginalized, in our characters,
Mm.
because it's used as a means to kind of subjugate them. It's used as a means by the Japanese or those who others to put them in their place. It's a means to put them in their place and to remind them of their position in society. And then in Sunja's case, I guess it's it's to remind her of there's a line in the novel, but I guess we can discuss that later about a woman's lot is to suffer, and it's all about her carrying the shame of having relationships with a yakuza. So I think I'll leave it there so we can discuss it later on.
Okay. How about Dr. Jean? Any thoughts?
Uh, yeah, the novel tells us that shame can be a boon or a bane for the characters, and for example, they have to hide their identities to overcome shame, but at the same time, shame also guides them to strategize how to go through life. No, so especially for instance when the um brother-in-law of Sunja did not want them to work in the market. Um, that was really, because he did not want to be shamed that he was
Mm.
supposed to be the breadwinner of the family, and yet two women are going to work. Um, yeah, but the two women had to really, overcome this just to be able to meet their basic needs. So I thought that was remarkable.
Okay. How about Dr. Kim?
Well, I guess, well, as the question says, the main characters, many of them, if not all, are struggling with their own like shames or out of their personal histories. But these shames, while I was reading the book, it's really time conditioned or sort of, framed within a particular historical time. For example, having a baby with Hansu
Mm.
was a big shame at that time for a young Korean lady that she even had to give up her hometown and then leave for a new world where nobody would know her personal background. But if same thing happened today, would that be that much shameful? Perhaps not. Of course, she was innocent, and then she was in a way even deceived by the man. So that's not something that she has to be feeling shameful. Okay, not only for her, but the smell of kimchi or garlic or whatever. So the shame, the feeling of shame is really im, imposed
Mm.
by the dominant ideologies or dominant values or dominant idea of the given time, you know. Uh, but and the way how the people are taking it for granted, sort of internalized value, in those generations, they took it for granted, and thought as shameful, but something that really not need to be feeling, shameful.
Yeah, so there are so many layers. I think if there are some questions during open forum, maybe we can go back to this related discussions, because this part we cannot really it was comprehensive by our panels, but it's still there's so much to talk about, I think. So let's see if our audience will give any questions. So we are now approaching to the last part of today's event. So let's go back to the title of the novel. In your opinion, why do you think the author chose Pachinko for the title? Although there were so many interview clips and interview articles with the author Min Jin Lee, and I think it was already explained. Did you see how it really relates to the book's central plot? If you have any personal sentiment or insight you wish to share, maybe Dr. Kim first this time.
Well, I guess I like the title.
Mhm.
Well, Pachinko obviously carries a very strong negative nuance in Japan. not necessarily in the West or even in Korea. But in Japan, pachinko is a place where, not a very like I mean, everybody goes to pachinko, but you're not supposed to be there. It's something bad, something, you know. So, and in a way, pachinko is a kind of castle that the lost Koreans built and then found a way out of the colonial oppression by accumulating their wealth through this demeaning, like castle. So it's still contradictory. It's in a way signifying the status of Korean Jainichi people discriminated in Japanese society even today. But yet, the power of pachinko through its money is allowing them to finally escape from that aggression and oppression. So it gives a sort of not necessarily contradictory, but very contrasting aspect of Chinese people
I
in
never thought
the
of
Japanese society.
that way, but it's really very profound to think the image of castle. How about Dr. Jin?
You know, I think this was in one of her interviews. Minji
Mm-hmm.
Lee, she said that Pachinko is a good title because it reflects how the game is played and how the lives of the characters were influenced or shaped by their lives during the colonial regime. Yeah, so yeah, I don't really know how to play pachinko, but it was described no extensively in the novel.
Yeah, maybe Nicole, anything to add?
Pachinko is like a pinball
Yeah, yeah.
arcade game. I've never played it too, but basing on how it's described and googling about what it looks like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a pinball slash arcade game,
Mm-mm.
and I guess the title reflects how the Zainichi has lived. It's a push and pull. It's this metaphor of gambling.
Mm-hmm.
They need to gamble. They need to negotiate their existence in Japan, and then also this kind of similar to the Zainichi, but pachinkos exist in Japan because of gray areas in the law. Gambling is illegal in Japan, but pachinko parlors are allowed to operate because of loopholes. So, and for the Zainichi, pachinko parlors are not only as escape, not only as entertainment, but also a means to earn money. They've always been precluded from joining companies from the start. They're precluded from joining other professions. So the Zainichi had to build their own businesses or had to be self-employed. And one such thing would be the pachinko, and the other is yakinikuya or Korean
Mm-hmm.
barbecue establishments
Mm-hmm.
historically. So and up to now, three quarters. This is a statistic from I think I forgot Professor Miyatsuka. He said that estimated three quarters of pachinko parlors are still owned by Zainichi. Um, so we have this idea of, as Dr. Kim said, being a pachinko is the one that made them rise out of poverty, but also this aspect of pachinko as a game of chance and luck. Um, it's a way of we have this game that lets you have agency to control, even though it has a grand design. And I think this also ties perfectly with how the characters are named in the novel. They are named with these Christian names: Isaac,
Mm-hmm.
Joseph, Noah, Musasu, Solomon. So it's nice to juxtapose those. So you have gambling, which is uncertain, and then you have this promise of salvation history, which is always certain. And the generation ends with Solomon,
Mm-hmm.
who biblically is the wisest man in the wisest man that has ever existed. And you have Musasu, who, because of his namesake would be Moses, the one who lifted the Jewish people out of slavery. So, and in the novel, his pachinko wealth lifted them out of poverty too. So you have these nice allegorical uh, meaning in the novel, and so in the end, we see Solomon taking over the pachinko business, even though he knows that he'll be shamed for it. His father doesn't want him to take over pachinko because he knows that people have negative perceptions of being a pachinko parlor owner. But he says that he does not care about what people think. So he now see that this character has wisdom, and he could actually have the solution, or he has the wisdom he to see beyond this identity problem of being a Zainichi. In the end, we see him accepting that a part of him is Japanese too. His Korean American girlfriend PV tells him that they can marry so he can work in the States and possibly become American citizen, but he refuses because he finally acknowledges that no, I am Japanese too. I am Korean and Japanese. So this is something previous generations in the Beck family did not realize. Musasu in Noah comes at a dead end. For Noah, it's a literal dead end in solving the identity problem. But with Solomon, we have a chance.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Nicole mentioned how the names of the characters also really symbolically give some different meanings and different ways of lives, how their lives really unfold in the story. So maybe the last question, because earlier Dr. Jin also mentioned another novel of Min Jin Lee, but would you like to, or would you have any recommended reading for our audience? If there are any books, either Korean or international or Filipino, that people who enjoyed pachinko could also enjoy further. Is there any book you wish to recommend, Dr. Kim?
Well, that's a sudden question. I'm not totally prepared for that. Well, there are actually Asian writers, not
Mm-hmm.
only Min Jin Lee,
Yeah.
but there are some Chinese American writers,
Mm-hmm.
or other Korean American writers. Especially Chang Ne Lee is one of my
Mm-hmm.
favorites.
Yeah.
And Chang Ne Lee,
Mm-hmm.
uh, his native speaker,
Yeah.
out of many novels, his native speaker is something that I highly recommend. Or Gesture Life.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Gesture Life might be more relevant to the Pachinko story, because the main character of Gesture Life is also connected to the Japanese colonial period and its memory, and who is struggling to escape from that colonial trauma, and hiding himself in the American society, and keeping a low profile life. It's became a Gesture Life.
Mhm.
How about Dr. Jin?
Well, yeah, aside from Minjin Lee, yeah, I've also uh tried reading Chang Mire, and also books about comfort women. Yeah. I've become very interested in this mainly because of what I teach and also my interest in feminism and all sorts of women's movements all over the world, particularly in those that were colonized.
Okay, lastly, Nicole.
Uh, if you want to read another novel about the Zainichi experience, then the novel Go by Kaneshi Kazuro.
Mm.
I'm sorry. It's a good jumping board. And
Mm,
then if you're interested with alternative histories, novels acting as alternative histories, and tackles post-colonial traumas like how Pachinko tackles traumas. I'd suggest State of War by Ninochka Roska. It's a local novel. So, but I'm afraid it's more cerebral compared to Pachinko
mm.
because it shifts time, and it even touches upon pre-colonial Philippines. So pre-colonial to the time of the dictatorship. Those are my recommendations.
Okay, very good. So I think we have some list of books that our audience can have it ready for your vacation or school break. So thank you so much, everyone. That we can now start a quick open forum. We have some questions from our audience. I think from Facebook and YouTube comment section. So when the questions are shown in the banner, I will read, and maybe if you wish to add some more things, just feel free to say some words. So shall we start from the first question? So first question is from Pam. What do you think it meant to be a good Korean or good Japanese in the context of the book? I think, was it Nicole you mentioned earlier?
It's Noah who is preoccupied with the idea of being a good Korean. Um, I don't think it means a certain set of qualities, of course, but it's more of following this idea of being a model colonial subject, um, which means to pass as Japanese.
Yeah,
That,
yeah, I
that's, the,
agree.
that's the idea. It's passing as Japanese, pretending to be Japanese, and erasing any Korean
Mm,
remnants in you.
Yeah, I obviously good Korean in the context of the book means, or context of the colonial space means who accept the colonial occupation
Uh,
and willing to become a subject of the great Japanese empire.
mm. Yeah, so shall we move on to the next question? I will read the question first. Many Korean media outlets have praised Pachinko for giving the international audience a chance to find out about how Korea suffered during Japan's colonial rule. Do you think the novel also has, read the
What
next,
that's
lessons
that, mm.
for Koreans of today? Dr. Kim, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I at some point I mentioned that the
Yeah.
novel is really great, and the reason why I thought the novel is great is because the novel is providing a very balanced and then thoughtful and well-researched account on the colonial
mhm.
experience, which is
Mm.
not necessarily demonizing Japan or Japanese people.
Mm.
Unlike many other, even including the Apple TV's drama version Pachinko, which is already demonizing Japanese people and then Japan
Mm.
as a empire. So in that aspect, I see a sharp departure, or difference between the two narratives, and I think as here, many Korean films and TV dramas vilify Southeast Asian, say, ethnic Koreans from China, as Nemo Kim points out, you know, the beauty of Pachinko novel is not trying to like vilify either Japanese or Koreans, you know.
Mm,
So that's why we need to pay more attention, close attention to the novel on the way
mm,
how it is reconstructing the colonial experience and colonial trauma.
Just
okay.
to add to what Dr.
Yes.
Kim said, Phoebe, the Korean American girlfriend, has this tendency in the novel to also cast the Japanese as the sole criminals in World War II. But to this, Solomon answers that, but the Japanese also suffered during World War II. You cannot discount the fact that ordinary citizens suffered too. So I guess it also presents this, what Dr. Kim is saying, as a balanced view of both sides.
Right. Dr. Jin, would you like to
Yeah,
add?
indeed, the book presents us a more nuanced way of looking at identities and looking at, for instance, the colonial struggle, and that, there are really no um, straight lines to define who the victims and villains are. And in a way, if I mean to relate to the question of Nemo Kim, then again, it's the greatest lesson in non-discrimination. No, if what is meant by the question is that, you know how would these films, how would the novel, or in fact the TV version would sort of have lessons, or can generate lessons for the Koreans of today, then I guess the lesson is that, you know um um things are not really black and white, and that uh to discriminate against another human being is outright wrong, and that we should not do it.
All right. So, I think among all of us, I think Dr. Kim only watched the adaptation series. So
Mm.
maybe next time, if we also access the adaptation, I think some news mentioned there will be season two. Am I correct, Dr. Kim?
Yes, actually, it seems that the Apple TV invested a lot of money for creating that
Right.
adaptation, and
Yeah.
they think it was a big success. So
Mhm.
I read the news that they are already in preparation for the season two. You know.
Right.
And as I
So.
also pointed out, the adaptation version, the drama, is only showing a part of the entire
Mhm.
novel. So they will find a lot more sources for the stories, you know, out of it.
Right. So, if our audience visits a fully booked Facebook or website, the copy will be on sale up until May 28th. So, don't miss a chance. So, let's see our last question. Ariel asked, how did you interpret the ending of the novel? Did you like it? Wish Nicole, maybe.
It was a very, for me, it was a very sad ending. I mean, because the novel ends with Sunja visiting the grave of her husband Isaac, and um, she and then it she buries the locket she has of Noah in the grave. So she digs a bit of a hole and then buries the locket she has. And I think we can interpret that as her moving on from Noah's death after decades have passed, moving on from the death of her son, but at the same time, I guess it's also acceptance of what happened to Noah. Because in the end, Sunja is still heartbroken with what happened with Noah. She still regrets what happened to her son because she actually says it's how could he have stopped her son from believing foolish ideas of ethnicity, identity, and nationhood? So I liked it because it offered closure and a sense of acceptance. And I also like it because in the end, it's her and Kyung-hee. She says in the end, Kyung-hee will be waiting for her at home. So it's like this, it seems that in the end, women are the ones who are strong enough to still live to see the successes of the next generation. So yeah,
Okay,
good
how
ending,
about
I guess.
Dr. Kim or Dr. Jin, if you wish to add something last word?
Well, nothing really particular for me.
Okay.
Yeah. For me, the ending really tells us that the novel really also focuses on Sunja and her struggle, and that it is very obvious that it is written by a woman. You know what I mean?
Okay, thank you so much. This concludes our open forum, and this is the end of our event today. Thank you so much for joining us every day. And after this event, for our other updates and future events, you can just visit website and social media pages of Fully Booked and UPKRC and our partner institutions as well. And if you missed any parts of the today's event, you can visit our channels later on, and you can rewatch the whole program as well. So it was really nice meeting all of you, even if it was a virtual meeting. And hopefully, we can have Dr. Kim to Manila very soon, and hope to see Nicole in person as well. And Dr. Jin, as always, thank you so much. And we hope to see all of you again in our future events. And thank you so much, and have a safe and lovely day. 감사합니다. Salamat po.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Take
Bye bye.
care.